Hello and welcome to How AI is Supercharging Clinical Trials, a pharmaphorum webinar brought to you by Syneos Health. From patient identification to recruitment to protocol development and design to trial monitoring and data analysis, AI can improve the effectiveness of current clinical trials in myriad ways for a variety of stakeholders. As this technology proliferates, those who don't adopt AI systems or don't implement them in the right way will fall behind their competitors. How can sponsors, investigators, and clinical trial sites best position themselves in this rapidly changing landscape? In today's webinar, we'll explore some of these different opportunities created by AI. I'm Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief of pharmaphorum, and today I'll be joined by Terttu Haring, President of Clinical Sites and Patients at Syneos Health, and Bob Zambon, VP of Technology Strategy and Strategic Partnerships at Syneos Health. Before we get started, a few points of housekeeping. There will be time for audience questions at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to submit your questions as you think of them. Our editor, Nicole Raleigh, will also be live tweeting this webinar from the pharmaphorum X account with the hashtag #PPWebinar, so you can join in on the discussion there as well. Finally, the recording of this webinar will be available on demand to all registrants shortly after it concludes. Thanks so much for joining us, and with that, we'll jump right in. So Bob and Terttu, let's start with some introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourselves and the work you do and how it intersects with our topic today of AI and clinical trials. Let's start with you, Terttu.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, where I am in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Thank you, Jonah, for hosting us. It is a great pleasure to be here. So a little bit about my background. So my name is Terttu. I'm an MD trained in general obstetrics and gynecology, and a more than 25 years experience in clinical development, and mostly in clinical operations, in CROs, in pharma, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, anything from being an investigator to running trial operations, data management, and for the last, let's say 5 years, very focused on innovation, and in Syneos Health for a little under a year now, looking after everything that is related to our sites and the patients that are participating to the clinical trials that Syneos Health executes.
And Bob, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great, thanks. Well, first off, thank you for having me. I think this is a really great topic, very exciting, and thrilled to be speaking about it with Terttu and you, Jonah. So I'm a scientist by training. I have a PhD in molecular and cellular biology, been really focused in the healthcare landscape and healthcare market and space from throughout my entire career, and even before, working at stem cell companies, start out my career and consulting from there, and focusing really on where the intersection of data, technology, and healthcare all come together. AI obviously being a big part of that now, and even in recent history as well, on how we've been leveraging machine learning in many different ways that we're going to be talking about today. So always love being able to leverage some kind of new technology, data analytics, which is kind of my personal passion, I'll say hobby, that I brought in to my career, to be able to accelerate what we're doing for patients and how we're getting new therapies into the market. I've been at Syneos for about 3 years at this point, kind of working across our real world data organization and our transformational solution organizations to be able to integrate that technology into everything that we bring to our customers.
So let's just start with setting the scene a little bit, lay out the landscape. There's obviously been an explosion of interest in AI lately, but AI has been in use in various capacities in the clinical trial world for a while now. So how would you describe, and we'll start with Terttu, and then Bob, I want you to chip in. How would you describe the current state of affairs? Who all is using AI, and what primarily are they using it for?
I think as you said, there has been an explosion, and I think that is a natural thing to happen when new technologies, new use of technologies is suddenly becoming available. I think we're all exploring many different elements. Of course, when it comes to clinical drug development, there are so many pieces of the puzzle that you can address with AI, and so many parts of running clinical trials that can actually be made easier. So I think where we are today is that there are certain parts of the clinical trial process that are well established, supported by artificial intelligence and advanced data science and data analytics, such as what is the performance of our sites that we recruit? Do we know where the sites are? There's other parts of that process that are less established at the moment. I think that we all want to crack the code on digital biomarkers, wearables, new disease endpoint generation, but that is a much harder one to address. So I think we're somewhere on the scale between at an operational level, yes, a lot of use of data and looking at data. On a more scientific and medical and disease endpoint scale, we still have a long way to go.
Interesting. Would you concur with that analysis, Bob?
Yeah, I do. I think one of the key things, as we talk about AI, is that AI is really a broad category. A lot of people right now, as we're having different conversations, they're thinking about OpenAI, ChatGPT, the large language models that are coming out, and how can they leverage that from a generative perspective to accelerate work. But there's a lot of AI that goes into healthcare that's beyond that, just from machine learning, predictive analytics, capabilities around that to help us understand patients, the overall healthcare journey, how we should design a clinical trial, and everything that Terttu had mentioned, that all comes together. That has been in progress for a number of years. And we're now at a point, I think almost an inflection point, where out of the generative AI aspects, we have ways to interact with AI that people haven't had before. Whereas before, it's been definitely more of a deep dive from I'll call it programmer data science perspective. People are now being able to leverage a lot of these capabilities in a way that doesn't just require, I'm going to build an interface or I'm going to do this, but in a way that is natural language, that they're able to ask questions and have those models leverage very differently and more fluidly than they would have otherwise. So I feel like we're rapidly accelerating downhill using AI in a place that we weren't 6 months ago, even a year ago, at that side. So totally agree. And it's an exciting place to be, but it's also something that we need to be wary of with a lot of different aspects on how we're leveraging, because we are talking about healthcare. It's not just, am I going to help myself summarize a document? In some cases it is, but it's people's health that we're talking about. So really critical that we're careful how we leverage these tools.
Yeah. Even in cases where it is as simple as, let's use ChatGPT to write a protocol document, it's not as simple as it would be outside of healthcare, because the standards are so much higher, right? The possible things that can go wrong.
Exactly.
Well, and to that point, Jonah, the possibilities that you want to make sure you include in your protocol. You don't inadvertently want to exclude things. You don't want to make things more difficult than they already are for clinical trials and patients in clinical trials and for clinical sites. So the human eye is one that I care deeply about in everything. But at the same time, we also have so many tools now to use AI to leverage all the intellectual exercises that we've done over the past 50 years in this space and bring it all together to have smarter protocols, to know what works, what doesn't work, to know where the patients sit, where not, what the patients really look like, what the profiles are, etc. So I think we really have to, as Bob said, leverage that we have all of this, and also want to leverage that there are so many companies today investing in this and all exploring different parts of it. And of course, there's a few bigger players, there's a lot of smaller players, and everybody's bringing their best intentions and best skills and capabilities forward. It's a very exciting space.
So what I want to do is move kind of through thematically about some of these buckets of areas where we are using AI, or as you pointed out, Terttu, maybe aren't as much yet, but are starting to think about. So to start with, let's talk about sort of the early stages of identifying your patients, recruiting them, and engaging them with an eye towards retention. What are some of the ways that AI is changing that phase, and that maybe phase is the wrong word because that has other meanings in clinical trials, that part of the process.
Yeah, Bob, do you want to kick it off with all the protocol considerations?
Yeah, sure. This is an area that Syneos Health is diving into a lot from a protocol analysis perspective and understanding what the landscape looks like from a protocol side of things. So being able to use AI, a lot of the Gen AI and large language model aspects, to understand the content that's in protocols and how they compare to each other broadly across a very large corpus of different protocols within therapeutic areas, within patient types, and across the entire healthcare landscape, even geographically based, and how different inclusion exclusion criteria are coming into play, how different patient populations are coming into play, so that we can look at a protocol and say, okay, this protocol that you've developed, that sponsors developed for a particular indication, particular therapeutic treatment modality, how does it compare to other protocols within that space that have already been executed or are being executed right now? What are the particular characteristics and criteria that say increased likelihood of a protocol deviation occurring, of an issue in training occurring, of slowdown in site startup, or potential recruitment issues coming up, or even from a regulatory success failure issues that are arising from there, based on here are the endpoints that you're using, here are the criteria you're using, here's how the patient burden that you have within your protocol, and what impact does that have both on a site and on a patient. So by building up and evaluating all these different protocols and using AI tools to be able to analyze them in respect to one protocol that's in development or creating one, what we're able to do is it something we could do with people? Probably. Could we do it at the scale we can do it with AI? No. We can look at hundreds and hundreds of protocols and say, here's the impacts that happen to thousands. Here's the impact of this particular criteria. Here's how we see it, the statistical impact of having these changes, and what can happen from there. Having a person do it manually would take months, to potentially years to have all that type of evaluation there. So it's leveraging AI throughout a lot of the components within a clinical trial design and the protocol design and all the strategy that goes into it to make sure that you get the best insight that you possibly can from the data that's available. And then again, like we've already talked about a little bit, having the experts and the subject matter experts and everything layer into that and look at it and say, okay, here's what the AI came back and told us. It said we should reduce patient burden by doing these three things. Does that make sense? Can we actually integrate this into the protocol we're doing, or other characteristics of our therapy, of the therapeutic area, of the patients themselves, that changes the dynamic that the AI models that we built won't understand? And that's a critical component here, is that all the AI that we're going to talk about today, and just really in general, it's not something that is going to go off and work on its own. You can have the best, let's say, best power tool, the best hammer in the world, best screwdriver, drill, whatever in the world, without a really skilled user and somebody who understands how to leverage that tool appropriately and what the underlying landscape is and therapeutic area is. There's a high likelihood that it will go somewhere that you may not want it to go. Like, it can easily give you a hallucination or something that's not appropriate. We've already seen that in many cases with lawyers and legal cases where they've used generative AI or similar AI capabilities to generate a case or generate support for a particular trial that they may be doing. And then it comes up, some things didn't exist, or it may lead down the wrong path, or it may misreference something. So it's an area where we need to be incredibly careful, but the power of being able to look at that and do an analysis on a scale that previously theoretically would be impossible really changes the game for how you can look at protocol design and the number of different factors you can think about as you put into that.
Can you give an example of an insight you might have learned from from this kind of AI work that you might not have learned otherwise, or how does this work in practice in terms of protocol design?
So I think one of a great example could just be something as simple as, well, if you include these three particular types of endpoints, right, and you're layering in measurements within your normal appointments that someone may have, that you're more likely to have a protocol deviation. Something that simple, because in order to do, say, something like an X-ray, blood work, and something else on top of it, these three lab tests all in one visit is actually incredibly onerous and difficult. It increases a very high patient burden. It extends the time that the patient has to be at a particular site. So while you may say, yeah, I do need these three, by looking through different protocols, the volume of deviations that they've had, that's like a trend that can be picked up that you can look at and say, we need to shift our protocol and how we think about the patient engagement perspective so that we can track these elements. Is there something else we can do, maybe from a decentralized approach, from a direct patient engagement approach, that could capture similar endpoints, lower the patient burden, lower the site burden, so that our data and outcomes overall are significantly improved or what we would do otherwise, and also reduce just the the amount of paperwork that you have to do from a deviation perspective, and really increase your overall ability to execute the trial in a timely fashion.
And I think, Bob, one of the, of course, things that working with the CRO, it can be a benefit to a lot of companies because we see so many protocols. But now with AI, we actually have a way to present all of those protocols and all the things that we learned over all those years and all those protocols to any customer, client, company, compound that has a desire to build a protocol. And where it used to be a lot of, and that will of course never go away, but there used to be a lot of, well, we've done this before, we know this indication, and these are our experiences, and they're valid. We now have not only experience, we have also data. And based on those data, we can take a lot more conscious decisions, and we can help our customers take the best decisions. And then I think after, if I may follow up on the protocol design, of course, as you mentioned already, you have patient recruitment. And what is, to my liking, far too often still the case is that we identify sites, and we identify doctors, and we identify that these are specialists that have done similar trials, or claim they have a database with these kind of patients, and we go and open the sites with a lot of work and a lot of investments. It's expensive to start a site, and then basically we always make a bit of a joke. We basically wait for Harry Potter magic to happen and for patients to magically appear at the doorstep of the investigators. And of course, there's still a lot of that still happens. But with the power of artificial intelligence and understanding where the patients actually are, literally, where do they live? What is their profile? What kind of how much time do they have to invest in a trial participation? Can they come to a clinic, or do we need to bring the clinic to them? We can actually focus on opening sites where the patients are instead of opening sites and waiting for the patients to appear. And for me, as an operational expert, that is one of the coolest things, that we actually have data to guide us where we should be running the trials.
Yeah, and even then, when you've picked your site, finding the patients, right? And
exactly.
like you say, not just waiting for them to magically show up on the doorstep.
Yeah. I think that,
and at the same time, if I may, that also brings me to one of the caveats that we have to consider, especially in this space, is that of course AI is based on previously collected data. So any place where we don't have data, we also don't know if the patients are there. So that is something to keep in mind, that with AI we always repeat things that we've done already before, and we can make new combinations, and we can make links and correlations that we didn't before. But if we don't have, and I'm making it up, if we don't have data on the patients in Azerbaijan, AI will not give us data on the patients in Azerbaijan. We'll still have to go and find those data. So that is something to really keep in mind.
I think one of the things too that's important, Jonah, like you were mentioning, and Terttu, you mentioned around recruitment and understanding patients. Engaging directly with patients, and the patient engagement component is a huge part of any clinical trial, from a design perspective, from how patients know about a trial, how they understand what's involved in it, how they should enroll, things along those lines. Yeah, yes, a lot of times it comes from a physician, primary care or other oncologist, something along those lines, that they may be engaging with, saying, hey, you may be appropriate for a clinical trial. But in some cases, particularly as we move towards more decentralized clinical trials and completely virtual trials, in some cases, some people may be getting an email. So understanding how different patients would react to an email, to different language, things along those lines. The way it's primarily done now, it takes a lot of time. It takes 6, 12 months to do A/B testing, to evaluate different language. And by having the appropriate language to target the appropriate population can mean the difference between recruiting 5 out of every 100 people you email, and 50. Like it's extremely dramatic. So one of the things that Syneos Health has started doing too, and evaluating how patients will react to engagement material, different types of material that we develop for studies, starting to build models of patients themselves in using various responses that have come out, understanding their patient journey, would they be positive or negative, or understand and have the depth of knowledge in a particular therapeutic area that going through a lot of treatment normally instills in a patient. So we started building those up to help us do initial evaluations there to accelerate that type of development and understanding in an area that I think where you look at the language models that are coming out and that understanding, that's kind of a key driver as well. But again, the key component to this, like Terttu alluded to and mentioned, is we need to have that understanding and the data that goes in to build these models, because if there's nothing there, we're just building a model out of the air. That's going to give us incorrect direction, incorrect assumptions. So it's critical that we have access to representative data from a population perspective, from all different types of socioeconomic demographics, racial, ethnic, and globally in different geographies as well, that all play a part on behavioral impact as well as healthcare impact within the patients that are involved in clinical trials.
And with all of those data, with all of those data, of course, you can help customers take very, again, conscious decisions, data-driven decisions on also how do I make sure that I have the representation of all the populations that are in my patient group and my future user group, and of course the whole topic of diversity is a hot one. I always like to think about it as representation, because that is what really matters. And based on all of these data that, of course, we have and we sit on, and combining the elements of a protocol design and the choices you make in a protocol design, plus all the data on where the patients sit and what the profiles of the patients are, a very interesting step that is then the next step is enrollment planning, because it's not just about being fast. It is very much about being reliable. And the more reliable we can predict where the patients are, what the patients will experience, where they will, what will be the triggers or non-triggers for enrollment or for retention or for data quality, the better the prediction on when will the trial be ready can be done. And of course, that is what everybody wants to know. When are we done? When can we submit the data?
So I think that's a good segue, because we talked a bit about patient engagement, recruitment, about protocol design and development. What about like when the trial is underway, data analysis, trial monitoring, data capture, and I would add kind of what you just mentioned about sort of predicting how the logistics of sort of, I guess, trial management. How is it going on? Is it on schedule? Are we collecting data at the right rate? All those sorts of areas. How's AI being used there, and what's the potential? And I guess this is also where we're kind of going to get into what you mentioned at the beginning, Terttu, about some of the things we're looking at in the future about biomarkers, endpoints, wearables.
Yeah. The challenge, of course, with our industry, our ecosystem, is that in the end we have the huge responsibility of presenting data to authorities that take decisions that will then, after those decisions, impact millions potentially around the world. So the confidence that we all, as an industry, as an ecosystem, as Syneos Health, as regulators, everybody needs to have in the data is enormous. And we all know that. And I think that is maybe why we're taking smaller steps to using AI in really what kind of data do we collect and how do we interpret the data that we collect. We're all very comfortable with a investigator transcribing data from the one screen in the hospital to the other screen in the hospital and call it electronic data capture. I know that is absolutely still the norm, but I also am convinced that 5 years on, that will really be so different, because we are looking for data that come from the patients, that reflect the patient experience, that reflect what the impact of a condition is on the patient's life. So we will move more and more to capturing data directly from the patients, whether that is active or passive. But that, of course, needs a whole new level of algorithm and the use of data references and AI to understand the quality of those data. So I would say that, yes, there is enormous potential, But today, few companies are really there to make something that will be accepted by regulators as a proof point of efficacy or safety of a drug. But that doesn't mean that we're not looking into it. And there's a lot of things you can do to support a patient during a trial with less manual involvement. We have chatbots in COA apps. We have virtual nursing assistants in helping people make an appointment with their investigator, making sure they're ready for their appointment, for their next visit. All those kind of things that used to be a paper leaflet stuck on the refrigerator that now pop up in people's phone an hour before. So those I would say support things that we see in so many other aspects of our daily life are absolutely entering clinical trials as well. But there is a bit of a way to go on the real data collection.
Yeah, I think. I was just going to say, I think we're seeing the evolution come little by little, like Terttu had said, around the data quality and capture components. The key things there are the volume aspect on being able to analyze data and identify outliers within data sets so that you can better, faster, cheaper, identify outliers as you go forward from there using AI tools, so that it's not, okay, let's wait until we get a report from a site and everything comes in and, oh, you know what, we just identified something that's an outlier and somebody's data point, it falls outside something that we think it should for this particular patient, be because of underlying health conditions, or how do we validate that? So whereas before we may have, if this blood test falls within these two ranges, it's normal and we think it's acceptable. If it falls way outside of it, we know maybe there's something wrong with the patient. If it falls like exponentially outside of it, the data is probably wrong. Well, we can start to look at trends within different types of patient populations. And how does that play a role? So it's not just, okay, we put two metrics in place to check it. It's fluid based on that patient. So we can identify it, even if it's within maybe that range. For this particular patient, it changed too much, and you start to understand where risk comes in, where you're monitoring in a more dynamic way that takes some of the burden off both the patients and on the sites as well. And, when we start to look at the monitoring in particular for trial monitoring in AI, a lot of people sometimes disconnect the AI component and the machine learning and algorithms that you need from devices that do it. So something as simple as, say, an Apple Watch or any other wearable device that you may have is completely changing the game when it comes to trial monitoring, and not having to have a patient go into a clinical site once a week to get maybe, an EKG done, or even certain blood tests done, things along those lines. But the key component of that, it's not just the device itself, it's the algorithms that are on there that let them translate that type of information into something that's meaningful from a healthcare perspective. And should it flag, either one, it's just like with the Apple Watch, you just get an EKG and it says you may have AFib. Well, that's a pretty complex algorithm that has to be built out, both from how does it do it from the sensors that are on the watch itself, and then how is it meaningful to that patient so they respond appropriately. Because one of the worst things they can do is send up an alarm from a health perspective that actually doesn't mean anything, because then the next time you do, if it is meaningful, they won't follow it. It's kind of like the sky is falling type of aspect that you need to be extremely careful in that regard and make sure you're telling patients the right thing. But really, that whole aspect from a monitoring perspective completely redefines what it means to be in a clinical trial and opens up the landscape for people that would be more willing to be in trials that are a little bit more for non-life-threatening, where there's not mortality on the line, to be involved in those clinical trials, particularly earlier in phase 1s and phase 2s.
Yeah. Is there a question that emerges about the integrity of the data in a situation like that? When you're getting the data in real time, you're being responsive to it. Does it somehow become less valuable as a trial?
I think it's a very good question, Jonah. I would like to think of it in two different ways. You have in a trial, of course, you have the endpoints that we're all after, and we need to make absolutely sure, as I said, that regulators take decisions based on very well collected and robustly analyzed data. There's also the day-to-day safety oversight that Bob mentioned, and I really think in the day-to-day safety oversight, the more we can share about the patient's well-being with their principal investigators, with their caretaker, with any home nursing response team, that the easier it will be to be in trials. And one of the examples that I'm very passionate about is if you think about really early phase oncology trials, these are very, very sick patients, usually in their last stages of their life. I'm very dedicated to help design trials and collect data in such a way that these patients can participate as long as possible at home, or can reduce the hospital stay to the shortest possible time, while we still are confident that we know what's happening and how we oversee their safety and how we enable investigators to oversee safety. And that is just one element where AI is going to make the difference if we start now, and we are starting now, by collecting data. As I said, AI doesn't exist without pre-existing data. So that's where we as an industry have a mission to embark in these new ways of working, even if there may not be an immediate benefit for the current trial. And I think that is the beauty of working with partners that focus on these patient-generated data collection systems, such as within Syneos Health. We have a strong partnership with uMotif that has beautiful, intuitive ways for patients to tell us and share how they're doing, and the investigator can react to those signals, allowing the patient to be at home, but not necessarily always immediately collecting a primary endpoint like that.
So we're about halfway through. I've definitely some more things I want to talk about. I do want to thank the people who have already sent questions in, and encourage folks to continue sending questions. In about 15 minutes, we're going to sort of transition into answering your questions. But before we do, are there any use cases we didn't talk about already, maybe didn't fit neatly into a bucket, or that we forgot about, that we want to add into the conversation or mention?
Yeah. Can I add one that I'm really excited about also? If you think about rare diseases, we all know that there are more and more rare diseases where the whole process and time that it takes for physicians and doctors to even come to a diagnosis, because symptoms may be so common or vague or not well described or different between patients. So to be able to use AI to basically read charts, and not only read codes that have been entered for a formal disease diagnosis, but to read charts based on symptoms, on blood works, on imaging, and an AI tool to put all of that together and to be able to pull the time to diagnosis forward, is first and foremost, of course, incredibly important for a patient that is in limbo, where what is wrong. And of course, from a clinical trial perspective, this helps recruitment of patients that have not been treated before, for example, that we again don't we know we can wait for them, but if we can accelerate identification of patients with a rare disease using AI technology to read charts, that is immensely powerful and benefits, again, both the patients and the protocols that we run. So that's one I wanted to add to the list.
It's interesting, and it is interesting. There's quite a bit of overlap between the AI use cases for clinical trials and AI use cases in clinic, right?
Of course.
This is
Of course, we do clinical trials in a clinic.
Yeah. Bob, anything else on your mind?
To highlight what Terttu said, I think the using AI to identify signals within healthcare information is huge. It's game changing, both from a healthcare perspective, but also from in general, how we do clinical trials and how patients are diagnosed, which inherently changes clinical trials, as we were just saying. Looking at imaging in particular and being able to pull out information from imaging data, something from x-rays to histopathology or across the board. Really, I've already seen it start to happen where using something like an H&E stain slide of a biopsy from a tumor, we're now able to start to identify, based on this particular H&E slide, which costs $50 maybe, if you're looking at it that much, $50 total. You can identify that someone potentially 95% likelihood has a genetic abnormality that you could then do a genetic test, which costs thousands of dollars to do, a full panel, and then put them onto the appropriate treatment. So it lets us start to identify measurement points that might not otherwise flow in. You look at something, you go in, and you say, my arm hurts to your doctor. And okay, first step, we're going to do an x-ray. Like always, it's just because an x-ray is very, very inexpensive. They want to make sure it's not something there before you progress to MRIs and CTs and everything more broadly. But being able to leverage an AI on top of that imaging data to start to identify information that we may not think is there already, and it gives us signals that we can start to leverage it, will let us diagnose patients quicker, will let us identify patients that may have a particular rare condition or rare disease, and really take things to a level of personalized medicine that it's just not possible with the humans doing all of the reading and everything from there. You need a human, I think, always to confirm what you're looking at, to make sure there's not something being done by the AI tool inappropriately. But there are things from a measurement perspective and from a correlation perspective that AI is going to allow us to do out of those tools that it's just not possible for a person to do on their own.
Let's talk about kind of some of the challenges here, some of the pitfalls, and you guys did a good job of mentioning some of those as we went along, talking about the importance of data. But from our perspective of, for our audience, for the kind of the really useful do's and don'ts, what are some tips and tricks for working with this tech for building good, robust AI solutions, and what should you watch out for? What are situations that, to avoid or where the tech might get you in trouble?
I always come back to what I keep saying. AI only is based on existing data. So even, for example, for the enrollment planning and the trial planning that I mentioned, it is based on what has been done in the past 3, 4, 5 years. It doesn't know what is happening right now today. And then you come into modeling, but of course you can again leverage AI. But if I have a protocol in a disease that was there was only one protocol in the past years, and that protocol did really well, and it was easy to recruit. If there's suddenly 5 other protocols in the same indication and a drug on the market, of course, those historical data that are driving my AI are not going to give me a reliable projection of the trial. And that is what I always say. You need the human eye. You need the information of today. You need to understand the current circumstances to really fine-tune what the data give you. That is, I think, what I want to say. And I was just thinking about there was a few years ago, Ukraine and Russia were countries where we would do a lot of clinical trials. I mean, those are not data that you can use today in the modeling of the prediction of your enrollment curves. So that's just a really simple example. And of course, you can model it again with the beauty of AI. You can take the things out. You can say, what if? But you have to have that human eye. You can't just say, spit out the enrollment curve.
Right. The world that data was collected in just doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't align with. Yeah. Bob?
I mean, what Terttu went through from a data perspective, I think is the key component there, the challenge that we're going to see. It's easy to take an AI. We've already seen this with a lot of how people have used, ChatGPT and everything, to take a tool and just assume it can do a lot of things that because you think it might, because it can do certain other things, it's going to be able to do everything perfectly. We've talked about that a little bit already, like from the legal perspective, and starting to trying to use ChatGPT to give you medical advice or to summarize a bunch of articles where it starts to hallucinate that other articles exist, that evidence exists. It's really important that we understand what data is going into the models that we use and the AI tools that we use, and what that means for the decisions that we're using them to drive. And this all ties down. I see we already have some questions coming in around it from a data privacy perspective, and how do we think about healthcare data and access to it in a way that makes sure that we're as inclusive as possible. Even when we think about, we want to make sure we get healthcare data from a broad, diverse population. If we ensure that the data we get back is very diverse and it's from, within the United States across multiple ethnicities, racial lines, things like that, there's still the access to healthcare component that comes into play that we also need to take into account. That what about people that just don't have data because they can't afford healthcare or they're not getting healthcare. Or when we look at other countries, same thing, they're not getting healthcare. These records don't exist. This data doesn't exist. So what does that mean for our models? How do we get this information so that we can start to do that? We can start to make sure that our models take everyone into account, or we can start to adjust them in ways that allow us to have a broad impact. And it's not just tools that focus on those that are able to or willing to share their data in some ways. And what does that mean from a data value perspective? We're seeing this question come up a lot when you start to look at generative AI components on how they're trained and what information goes into it, and copyright law and things along those lines. Those are going to directly carry over into healthcare. And we've already seen it with tissue samples and with genetic sequences and cell lines and things like that on who owns people's underlying healthcare information and what happens from there. And it flows out even more when we talk about the protocols into how broadly accessible should clinical trial information be, and how can everybody leverage it. The best case scenario is all the clinical trial information in the entire world for every clinical trial is shared to do some of these models and built out. Realistically, is that possible? Will people be able to share it from a commercial perspective? What does that mean to different businesses where this is critical to be able to have revenue incoming so research can continue? So that's one of the biggest things. I think one of the biggest hurdles that we get over is that data aspect that we really need to think about. There's lots of different groups that are building it out already, from standards on models, with what data goes in and how you train it and how it's transparent as you build that out. And that's the key thing we're all going to need to work, I think, jointly on to make sure that we build the best models we can and use them effectively.
Yeah, and if I may pivot to the challenges, and based on what Bob said, we of course have enormous opportunity, and let's absolutely not forget that. We highlight challenges, but we have so many data at our hand that will just help run our trials more effective with drug that may be better targeted, with a smaller sample size, because we are better aware of what we need to measure. And all of that will just enable us as an ecosystem, as an industry, to bring those treatments to the shelves of the pharmacies that patients are really waiting for. And at this stage, I want to say it as strongly as that if we don't leverage this, we are really behaving in an unethical way, because there is all this potential out there. We have to be careful. We have to know what we do, but we can't afford not to do. So that is a bit of a pivot to a challenge, Jonah, I know. But yes, there's challenges, but we have to use our human intelligence to overcome and address, because we have an obligation to do what's right for the patients.
So I want to jump into audience questions. We've gotten a ton, and so I want to make sure we have time to get them. And I'm going to start with one that sort of follows along with what Bob was just discussing around data. So this is it's a long question. I'm going to try to summarize a little bit, but still get the whole gist across. It's a two-part. One is, do you see AI integration with EMR and payer databases to improve patient access, representation, safety, timelines? And how do you manage this against HIPAA and other privacy requirements? And the other half of the question is, if you do manage that and you have this huge amount of data, how do you avoid the data overload? And how do you manage questions about IP ownership and AI generated data? So it's a lot of questions packed in there.
Bob, yeah, no.
Sure, I'll dive in first, Terttu, and then you can as well. So I think we're already seeing the integration with EMR data and payer data, particularly structured data, we're there. It's done. It's happening. We're leveraging a lot of those different databases, particularly within the United States. That data is, I'll say, readily available for license in a very privacy-preserving way within the United States. It's an interesting question, because it gets to the point of, what does representative data mean? And when we look at data that's available right now from an EHR, a claims perspective, and everything kind of associated with that, within the United States, there's a wealth of data you can get access to that applies that it's HIPAA protected, it's de-identified, and we can generate models on, and we're good and moving things forward. You go outside the United States, and that's a completely different story. And I think that's where we need to start looking at, how do we, now that is not me saying it's better in the US and it's worse outside or vice versa. I think we need to find the happy medium where patient privacy is preserved and we're able to access data to develop the tools that advance healthcare in the way that we're talking about, advanced clinical trial design, advance everything as we're mentioning. There is a medium that we're going to have to find and do it, or it's going to it's going to go away that people just don't like. So we need to have those conversations to keep that moving forward as we go, so that we can make decisions that are appropriate and everything along those lines. From the aspect of, do we think there's going to be data overload? I'm going to say no, just straight up. I don't believe there will be data overload. With the wealth of information that we have right now, we're looking at everything. If we were saying maybe if we start pulling in everybody's genetic information, full genome sequencing in there, and we're talking true big data, maybe there might be some kind of overload. But with the acceleration of compute power and what we can actually do and how models will be developed and streamlining them down for optimization as they move into day-to-day use, I don't see it as a problem. I see having more data as an opportunity for us to be able to build out additional things, confirm what we're building in tools, and then expand on them. There's no reason we can't refine the models that we have as we move forward, or generate new ones as more and more data becomes available. So I view it as a positive, having lots of data available versus less. And I don't really think, as long as we have strong privacy protections and legal frameworks around those, it will let us move forward very quickly.
In addition, I think a lot of healthcare providers are already in their informed consent to collect patient data. They are already putting in there that the data can be used in an anonymized way for research objectives. I think that covers a lot. And again, anonymized data or even tokenized data where only very, very few people know the identity of a patient will really help us unlock the potential of the data that are available.
We got a question early on when we were talking about the patient engagement side about patient burden and how to kind of build consideration for how much burden is being placed on the patient during the protocol building. That the person who asked the question, this is a topic that's been on the table for some time. How much progress has been made, and how can AI create a change there?
Well, I'd like to start with, thank you for the question. As Bob said, by understanding better what causes dropouts of protocols, what causes poor adherence to protocol procedures and protocol violations, what are the main causes of missing data. By knowing that, of course, those are key indicators of patient burden. That is basically too much, otherwise there wouldn't be these problems. That is a very first step. And I think based on those and in artificial intelligence running on all those kind of data, we will have so much more concrete things to go back to a patient voice or a patient panel or a patient consultation with very concrete data, again, that have come up. So again, and then there's the other way around, where the scientists may say, well, this is a really, really important assessment. And yes, I keep hearing that it is a patient burden, but now we'll actually be able to show the data to the scientists about patient burden. And I think that is something quite new that we haven't been able to do before. It was very anecdotal. So with these AI tools on that kind of data, the whole discussion will change. Not saying that immediately the patient burden will change, but we will be much more conscious about what we put in and what we don't put in, and what is a burden and how do we try to make that burden more bearable, or how do we address that if it's really necessary, because we know more.
What is, in your experience, what's the sponsor's appetite like right now for including AI in clinical trials? Are they eager to start using it, or are they waiting for someone else to start first?
I want to combine that with another question that I saw about synthetic control arms. I'm reading the questions to you. Ultimately, everybody in this industry that's developing drug wants to get their products approved based on efficacy and safety data and reimbursed based on impact of life, health, economic outcomes data, etc. I think the challenge that we have on the table right now, and that we're all working on, is how do we leverage AI while securing reliable endpoints, outcomes, health, economic analysis, etc., etc. So what is the appetite? It is very much a business case. What are the risks? What are the benefits? What is the a level of tolerance for risk that both certain diseases, but also very different sponsors and pharma companies take. Regulators, of course, play a huge role in this. The more there will be acceptance of, for example, artificial or synthetic control arms or aggregated control arms, the easier it will be. I firmly believe that we have to walk this path in partnership with regulators. Nobody knows exactly where we'll land, so let's hold each other's hand and find the right way together, and not go off in one direction just to be told, oh no, this was completely wrong, and go back on our steps. So there's a lot of that. That's not a firm answer to the question. There's a lot of considerations, and it's absolutely a topic worth discussing, assessing, agreeing on, understanding each other's, understanding what we want with timelines, what we can do with efficiency and timelines, and how not to jeopardize the ultimate objective of the trial.
If I could add one thing too, I think the synthetic control arm question is a really interesting one when it comes to AI, because I think what we've been talking about, the ability for AI to understand and be leveraged to be able to analyze a broader swath of data than we would otherwise, at a level of detail and granularity and trending than we would otherwise see, it is going to change the way we think about synthetic control arms. That being said, the opportunity to do synthetic control arms, external control arms, has been around for a number of years right now. So the discussion to me is more, is the underlying data that we're going to use fit for purpose? And when can we get over that hump that we're still working towards from a regulatory perspective, industry perspective? What's acceptable? What are levels of risk where a company, a sponsor is going to say, you know what, I'm okay with trying a purely an external control arm, synthetic control arm approach versus traditional that I know will work? That's more of a hurdle right now than the tools. But I do think as we continue to move forward, and we start to look at patients more holistically throughout their entire healthcare journey, not just here's a clinical trial and we have data for 6 months, 12 months that they're in the trial, but instead we look and say, here's the entire patient from birth to now. Here's everything they've gone through. And AI will let us understand patients in that regard, where we have those more fit for purpose capabilities that come around. That's the fit for purpose component. A lot of times it applies to data, but Syneos Health in particular really thinks about all this stuff from a fit for purpose as we move forward in each area. And what can we build from a tool perspective? Who can we partner with? Who can we work with that has a solution that's fit for purpose for a particular trial, particular indication, therapeutic area, patient, individually? That's most important, because you don't want to use the wrong thing. Use my tool analogy. Yeah, I can use a hammer to put a hole in the wall, but if I just need a certain size, it's much easier to use a drill. So you should use the right tool for the job with the right understanding and the right skill set as well.
One of the reasons I didn't ask about synthetic arms during the main part of the Q&A is I think it's such a huge topic. It could be its own whole webinar. And in fact, we may have done a whole webinar about it. So I appreciate you kind of dipping into that. But I think it's going to be a huge part of the conversation in the next few years when we talk about AI in clinical trials, and could be most of the conversation eventually. So I don't know if we're going to get to all the questions, and I apologize if we don't, but I think we're going to get close. Here's a very kind of practical question. How do you think about which AI capabilities you want to build in-house versus acquire versus partner with other providers? You mentioned you have our partnership earlier with Motif. So these things you guys are definitely thinking about.
Bob, you're the head of partner.
Sure. So that is a great question, and I think it's particularly pertinent because of where we are in the AI journey. As we go through, and tools that are evolving, models are being created. There's always something new that's coming out on a day-to-day basis. So at Syneos, we build and have the capability and are building lots of models and AI-driven tools that we talked about today. Do we only build internally? No. We're always scanning the landscape to look at what someone is developing and what's being built out. Is there an image generation tool that could be leveraged effectively, or an image analysis tool that we could build in and integrate into our solutions that are there? Does someone have a new model that's been developed that's trained on something specific in a specific therapeutic area that we can pull in? That, from a business perspective, we need to think about a lot of this too. What makes sense for building out models? What makes sense for who's developing, something that's very focused in a space or not? And when do we partner? When do we work internally? A lot of our protocol work right now, given our experience as a CRO, is leveraging our own internal build capabilities that we have out of our RX data science organization to build that up. And the rapid AI lab capabilities that they have, where they can stand up new models, new tools, new capabilities in days to weeks, very quickly, to test out an assumption, test out a capability that we think might be useful, and then turn it into a full-fledged production level tool much more rapidly than you might be able to otherwise. But in other cases, like, would we want to recreate ChatGPT from scratch? No, it's already there. The price model is realistic, and we can use that as the base and the foundation for us to build things that our expertise brings to the table, brings a lot of value to, do that value add to it, and deliver that to the sponsors and customers that we work with in an accelerated and much quicker way. So if anybody's out there is interested in working with us and partnering with us, please give me a call. I'm more than happy to have those discussions. That's one of the most exciting parts of my day, is hearing what companies are doing, what new and interesting things that they're trying, and where we can work together to move the entire healthcare landscape forward. So.
Yeah, from my perspective to that question, it's a very important point, the scalability. And as I said at the beginning, there's so many companies and really smart people exploring where AI can make a difference. But scalability is going to be the key to success in this clinical trial space. And I think as a global CRO, we can definitely support scalability of companies that would not have that option by themselves. So that's something I'm really keen on. As I said, we have to serve the patients. We have to unlock the potential of AI for patients that are waiting. And partnerships are fantastic. I also am very keen and working closely with Bob on several solutions within Syneos Health, where we really look at the data that we have right now and that we have stored based on years of experience and large volume of protocols that we do. For example, for enrollment planning, for risk mitigation, for enrollment, etc. That is things that we can do in-house because we have those data ourselves.
So I'm going to try to squeeze 2 more questions in the next 3 minutes. The first one, will AI ever replace CRA and CTM jobs? So that's clinical trial manager, research associate.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, so within Syneos Health, CRA, CTMs come under my department. We can't do without the human intellect. We can't do without the human touch. Oversight of what happens in all of those sites around the world is extremely critical. Supporting investigators who usually have a day job that is not running clinical trials, supporting our sites to be successful is key. I do think the nature of the job will change, as it has changed over the past 20 years. I mean, when I was an investigator, I had huge binders with lots of yellow sticky notes, and we don't have those anymore either. So yes, the nature of the job will change, but we still, from a sponsor and a CRO perspective, have this absolute duty to make it easy for investigators, for sites, and for patients to be part of a clinical trial. And that organization, logistics, flexibility, adjusting to each country, each site, knowing how the different sites work, that will always be needed. But I really, really hope we have tools to move away from the CRA in the broom closet with 3 different screens to check what is the truth. So that is what I look forward to.
And then I'll end with the very first question we actually got in, which I've been saving because it seems like a good note to end on. Is there any use case where we can say that AI fully transformed the landscape, or 100% worked? And I would just say, or is on the way there.
I think you can't get away with starting up a protocol without enrollment planning based on historic data and AI analysis of everything that has happened in the past in that patient population. And I also really want to stress, as we said before, representation of all the different patients that need to be part of a trial is just so much easier by having more data and more ways to look at those data before taking decisions on where and how to run your trial.
Totally agree with Terttu. The ability to use AI and ML to understand real world data at a scale and volume that we wouldn't be able to otherwise is something that I think people think it's normal and day to day now, that these are the tools that allow us to get there, that allow us to process those volumes of data, that allow us to generate insights from them, to design trials, to understand what this looks like, do simulations to predict out how long a trial will take, what's the best country, what's the best site, what's the best PI, what's the best trial design. That's all in play right now. That 100% has changed from just taking a pure expert opinion view into a very much more data-driven and expert view together. That's leading us into the future.
Well, thank you both so much for making the time to do this today. It's been a really fascinating conversation. I hope that all of you have enjoyed it. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in, for asking some great questions. If we didn't get to your question, I do apologize. And thanks again to Syneos Health for sponsoring this webinar and this great conversation.
Thank you, Jonah. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, until next time. And I will just say again, we got several questions about this. There will be a recording. It'll come to your email that you use to register for the webinar. And that should be available within the next couple of days at the maximum. So feel free to dive back in and yeah, thanks so much for tuning in on a Monday morning or afternoon. Bye, everybody.